Dr. Laurie Dohmen has received training in acupuncture, food therapy, Bach flower essences, and most extensively Western herbs. She received her Master's of Therapeutic Herbalism from Maryland University of Integrative Health in 2014. She downsized her integrative mixed animal practice in Delaware and now lectures regularly on Western herbal veterinary medicine and other holistic topics. She started an education company, Purple Moon Herbs, and studies. She has a hands-on course in Western veterinary medicine. Dr. Dohmen is the past president of the Veterinary Botanical Medical Association and a member of American Herbalist Guild, International Veterinary Acupuncture Society, American Academy of Veterinary Acupuncture, American Holistic VMA, AVMA, and Delaware VMA. She's on the editorial board of the AHVMA Journal. Dr. Dohmen lives on a 72-acre farm with her husband, 2 sons, many 4-legged animals, and organic herb and vegetable gardens. Without further ado, here's Dr. Dohmen.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, welcome back. I hope everyone had a nice lunch. So we're going to continue from this morning where we talked about the underpinnings of ethnomedicine in general, and we're going to talk about the specifics of ethnoveterinary medicine in this lecture hour. So a few definitions again to get us started. Ethnoveterinary medicine is the science that studies the beliefs, knowledge, techniques, methods, and practices used in the care and promotion of animal health. And I think that's very important that they include the word promotion, preventative medicine. It's a big part of ethnoveterinary medicine and not always thought of as a big part of human ethnomedicine. So, ethnoveterinary knowledge is acquired by communities over many years and passed between generations through oral tradition. And we talked about how it's transmitted in the last hour. In ethnoveterinary treatments, medicinal plants are used as well as minerals and animal products. It offers valuable alternatives or adjuncts to modern treatment procedures. Promoting ethnoveterinary medicine means helping local people use their experience and knowledge to build on their own strategies and resources. So like Greg Tilford was talking about in his keynote, using the whole picture of keeping it local and keeping it there and not bringing in and changing the whole ecosystem of the area, but actually embracing the ecosystem of the area. So ethnoveterinary pharmacology is the investigation of a people's use of plants and other materials in preventing and treating animal diseases, wounds, fractures, encouraging fertility, appetite, productivity, and so forth. Most core studies make at least mention of this very basic aspect of veterinary care, and some go into considerable detail. And this McCorkle is the person who first defined ethnoveterinary medicine and started this field of study. And if you were here this morning for Greg Tilford's lectures, he mentioned zoopharmacognosy. We're going to talk about it a little more today. It is defined as self-medication in animals. The first time I ever heard about this, I think most of you know Cindy Lankenau. When I first came to one of my earliest AHVMA meetings, she was speaking, and her whole entire lecture was on a horse that was lame, and the people didn't want to take care of it, and they threw it in a field, and she sat outside the field and watched what it ate and picked it and did basically an ethnoveterinary study of this horse and how a zoopharmacognostic study, and saw how it self-treated and got itself healthy. I can still hear her lecturing about it. I talk about it all the time because it was one of the most powerful lectures I've ever been to. And it was before I ever heard of zoopharmacognosy or ethnoveterinary medicine or anything, before they were even really terms, but it was all about the horse self-medicating, and it cured its lameness. And so she has a whole lecture on that and what it treated with and why and how it cured itself. So that is zoopharmacognosy. The basic premise is that animals utilize plant secondary compounds or other non-nutritional substances to combat or control disease. So they really are medicating themselves. They're not just eating it as nutrition. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that today. So the research and development constitutes systematic research and development, which takes as its principal subject or its major departure point folk knowledge and beliefs, practices, technology and resources, social organization, and so forth pertaining to any aspects of animal health among species being raised or managed by human beings. So this is, as opposed to zoopharmacognosy, which we'll also discuss wild animals, ethnoveterinary medicine and research and development is primarily focused on domesticated animals and animals that we're interacting with as, and taking care of as human beings. So the research has as its explicit overarching goal the enhancement of livestock productivity through improved management of animal health as informed by an understanding of folk veterinary medicine and related husbandry techniques. Pastoral peoples possess a rich store of knowledge about many livestock diseases. And of course this goes beyond livestock to other domesticated animals, but that is where it started. So I loved this picture. It's a chicken, obviously, and the garlic, ashwagandha, aloe vera, ginger, onion, amla, which is an Ayurvedic herb, green tea. Here's a bunch of them listed again: cinnamon, tulsi, lemons, papaya, turmeric, thyme. And if you look at this, aside from all the things and showing you how they all treat and keep the chicken healthy, so many of them, papaya, lemon, turmeric, ginger, garlic, we consider them foods. So this morning I was talking again about that continuum from food medicine all the way to toxic. And this is a great example showing you all of that. Like aloe vera and neem they're good medicinal herbs, but they're much stronger than, papaya or lemons that we just eat, right? So you can kind of see that continuum in this slide. But anyway, I thought it was just a great picture of herbs and all the great things they do for chickens. So ethnoveterinary medical research. The first step is documentation and validation. So one of the newer importances of documentation is due to the loss of traditional knowledge, due to rapid lifestyle changes. And I said this a bunch in my last talk because this is the overarching problem. Even the people who are researching are racing against the clock before this knowledge is lost. The plants are lost. So it really is a race against time in that way. And as an aside, I meant to say this in the last hour, some of the biggest funding of researchers are from the pharmaceutical companies because, like we talked about, the original drugs came from herbs. They studied herbs and they pulled one constituent out and they made pharmaceuticals. Well, now they've tried to synthesize all these things in a test tube in a laboratory, right? And they're dramatically failing and killing people left and right and causing worlds of problems. So pharmaceutical companies have realized that it's actually safer to make even pharmaceuticals, single component pharmaceuticals, as derivatives of plants. So they're going back to study this. So it's one of those double-edged swords because they've got the money to do the research to keep this knowledge for all of us who want the herbs. But on the other hand, then they're going to pull the herbs apart again and make a drug out of them. So there's benefits and detriments to everything in life, right? So that's the one on a lot of the research. And lifestyle changes are socioeconomic, ecological, and technological. So ethnoveterinary practices vary between regions, cultures, and individuals. I have an example later on of two parallel situations and how they treat differently, so we'll talk about that more. And the areas with the most biodiversity and ethnographic diversity have the most significance. I don't know that they have the most significance, but you get their most bang for the buck because you can study the most in an area that is the most diverse. And we'll see some examples of that. Folk knowledge about animal health care continues to be of value in animal rearing traditional societies as well as increasingly in organic farming in industrialized areas, yet it is an understudied aspect of ethnobiology. So I love that Purdue is now doing all those commercials. We feed our chickens thyme and oregano. You know, we all know they're great antibiotics and antimicrobials, but you know, now they're getting some attention because a company the size of Purdue is talking about it on TV. So that would be the organic farming side of it. They have to do something, and that's what they're using, and that's great. So there are some differences. They're very, you know, tracked together, but there are some differences between human and veterinary ethnomedicine. Ethnoveterinary practices have probably followed two main evolutionary pathways, one in relation to folk medicine, another in relation to zoopharmacognosy of domesticated and semi-domesticated animals. Ethnoveterinary medicine is not an isolated aspect of culture, but one more manifestation of the health system that is conceived by its people. We talked about the cultural aspects of it in the last hour, and I think we all are aware that veterinary medicine is just another offshoot of how our culture sees medicine in general, right? So that translates to all cultures. The veterinary medicine is part of that bigger system of medicine. Whatever they believe is the system of medicine, is how they treat animals too, for the most part. So, ethnoveterinary medicine exists wherever humans live in close relationship with animals. It is especially relevant in societies where animal husbandry is a primary mean of subsistence. And so keeping that going and keeping their animals more healthy and more affordable keeps people in these cultures, because they can make money at it and they don't have to leave for work and go elsewhere, and these cultures don't have to be dissolved. There is a high degree of coincidence between the veterinary and human medicinal uses of plants, in the notable homeology between the ways of preparing and administering them, and in the therapeutic criteria involved in both types of health practices. That goes back to being a manifestation of the health system. However, there are a few very important differences. For human treatments, people tend to select the plant parts with more care, separating flowers from stems, while for ethnoveterinary uses, they tend to employ the entire aerial part or the flowering stems, including stems and leaves, rather than selecting only the flowers. Sorry, let me see if I can do something about that. So part of that is because we're less specific in, you know, animals are less particular about that kind of thing. If there's some stems in their tea, they're not really going to care. Like, we can be really picky. I was at dinner with some people last night, and they were talking about how picky their kids are about food, you know, so we as a society are picky, so that's part of it. The other thing is, like, herbivores, they're going to strip. I mean, my goats, they strip everything off the stems. They can avoid the stems a lot more easily than we can. Their mouths are more agile that way, so. Another important difference between human and veterinary medicine in our study area is as regards to form and preparation and administration seems to be that the remedy is not as carefully prepared when it is destined for the animal. So not just are the herbs not as carefully selected, but the formula isn't as carefully prepared. So, and one more thing that I found that was really salient and interesting is that human treatments tend to be in formula, whereas veterinary treatments are in simples. Does everybody understand that? Know what that means? Okay, so formulas are anywhere from 3 to 7 herbs together. If you get more than 7, it gets muddy and it doesn't work well. Whereas a simple is 1 herb used by itself, and it's called a simple. And in herbal medicine, we hardly ever use simples. There's like, I have a list. I do a talk on simples where I just talk about the ones that can be used as simples, but I can do that all in 2 hours. So that's as few as I use. Mostly we use in formula because we want to come at diseases from a holistic approach, so we want to treat on many levels and many different things. And 1 herb can do that, but more herbs does that better, and herbs work in synergy. So in humans, it's usually in formulas, but what's really interesting to me is the veterinary treatments are usually in simples. And I read that in multiple articles across the board in multiple cultures. So I don't know what it means, but I think it's really interesting. So that's how they do it. Not that they're never in formula, but less often. So to me, that's a really big difference in the approach. So 75% of the 60 plant species reported in one particular study are also used in human medicine. 45% of the uses are applied to treat similar disease, demonstrating a high degree of convergence between traditional veterinary and human medicines, two disciplines which mutually enrich each other. So here we have zoopharmacognosy. It is almost the underpinning, not only of ethnoveterinary medicine, but of all herbal medicine. Many of the herbs that we know, we have learned from watching animals use them. That's that line of training. Early in the coevolution of plant-animal relationships, some arthropod species began to utilize the chemical defenses of plants to protect themselves from their own predators and parasites. It is likely, therefore, that the origins of herbal medicine have their roots deep within the animal kingdom. From prehistoric times, man has looked to wild and domestic animals for sources of herbal remedies. Both folklore and living examples provide accounts of how medicinal plants were obtained by observing the behavior of animals. So a couple of great examples is we have coffee thanks to goats. So next time you see a goat, if you're a coffee drinker, say thank you. And are people familiar with ayahuasca, which is South American shamanic psychotropic combination of actually two herbs? They learned, and I always wondered how they figured out to put these two specific herbs together, because the psychotropic herb doesn't work unless you have the other herb to activate it, to potentiate it. So that's a great example of synergy. And I was like, who thought to put these together in the first place? A jaguar. Okay, so if you listen to Richard Mandelbaum, who spoke in San Diego for AHVMA, he's brilliant and amazing, and I'm lucky I get to teach with him in February, but he's the one who's taught me a lot of this. And Richard Mandelbaum, I was talking about ayahuasca, and he's like, you know that comes from jaguars. And I'm like, what? So there's all kinds of cool examples. It's coming out more and more how much. They just observed them and saw them going on trips, you know, psychotropic trips, like clearly being out there. But he has a huge talk on zoopharmacognosy that I'll be giving at this conference in February, and he has all these examples of animals deliberately, you know, having mind-altering, mood-altering, etc., doing it by choice. Just, you know, so we aren't the first ones that invented, you know, getting high in whatever form you want to, whether it's alcohol. He has this great quote of an owl that got drunk and they like had to put it in a jail cell. It's like this funny news article from somewhere in Europe about an owl being in a jail cell and being released on its own recognizance once it's sobered up. I mean, it's great stuff. So we didn't invent any of this, right? We just learned from the animals. You had a question?
Just a silly remark, you know, like, because there's one plant that nobody uses the regular name, but horny goat.
Horny goat, right? So I'm not sure if that one came from watching a goat. I'd have to look that up. So not only were medicinal plants learned from watching non-human animals, but also food herbs and psychoactive herbs. So we learn a lot from observation when we take the time to stop and watch and listen, which I think is another really important point. So it can be difficult to distinguish pharmacologic versus nutritional adaptations made by animals. There is some evidence that they deal with and take advantage of plant allelochemicals that have apparent medicinal effects in a feeding context. Some species use traditional veterinary practices are plants that, I'm not quite sure what this is supposed to say, but basically they consume specifically for healing themselves. And some of the ways they know that is like there's a lot of studies in all the primate species, and they will only eat a little bit of it. There's some leaves that they roll in a certain way and make, you know, like a cone out of, and they're very rough, and they swallow them whole, and they use it to scrape their intestines to get all the parasites off. That's actually in Barbara Fougere, who's speaking tomorrow or Monday or something. Her book with Susan Wynn, Veterinary Herbal Medicine, is where I read that one. So they see that. They also see the mothers push their offspring away. You know, offspring want to taste everything and they want to introduce them, but if they're using it medicinally, they will actually stop their offspring from tasting it because it is medicine, just like we would not let our kids taste our medicine, but we would let them taste our food. So there are specific ways that they can tell when they're using it medicinally as opposed to when they're using it as a foodstuff when you observe. It's all about observation. So I'm glad you guys are enjoying this because I think this is so cool, which is why I like to talk about it. So the importance is it provides promising therapeutic efficacy, minimal side effects, decreased drug use residues in animal products consumed by humans. You know, there's all those withdrawal times and all that stuff. You don't have to worry about that with most herbs. Therapies to which microbes and parasites are susceptible. Bacteria is still a major cause of mortality in animals around the world, and parasites are a major cause of productivity loss in livestock. We're going to talk about that a lot more because I think that's really an important part of this. Not only does it provide therapies that they are susceptible to, but they are unable to mount resistance, and that is due to the multiple mechanisms of action which herbs come with, because again, they're not a single chemical, they're multi-chemicals, they come in multi-ways, so the bacteria and the parasites can't mutate against all those ways. It's not survivable. If they mutate against one, then the other is going to work, kind of thing. So. It relays knowledge of toxic plants. So, you know, if you're watching this zoo pharmacognosy and the animal eats something and keels over and dies, you're kind of going to know not to eat it, right? And also plants that are toxic to humans that are ingesting the animal products. We're familiar with that. Rat poison. How often do we see cats eat mice that ate rat poison? It's the same theory. And it provides knowledge to avoid herb-drug interactions. These pros and cons are pretty much the same as from the last hour. Ease of acquisition and availability, efficacy, trust in the medicinal plants, low cost of the healers and materials, broad spectrum, use of local, low purchasing power of pharmaceuticals, lack of veterinary services. This is even a bigger problem in the veterinary world. I mean, if there's no human health care, there's definitely no veterinarian going to that area, right? So, distrust of outside veterinary professionals, lower side effects, and pharmaceuticals can be adulterated. Cons are inefficacy of treatment, lack of dosing information, overuse of plants, use of toxic plants that do harm the animal or that harm the human consuming the animal or its products, seasonal unavailability of plants, lack of standardization of remedies or doses, and lack of interest by younger generations due to early urbanization. So let's talk about the parasites and microbes, because that's a really huge part of this. And I think, especially, with all the bacterial resistance, this is something we really need to be aware of, a place that herbs can really do a lot of good and prevent a lot of problems. Parasites and microbes cause a significant productivity loss worldwide. Pharmaceutical antimicrobials and anthelmintics are becoming ineffective due to resistance and mutations of the bacteria and parasites. Herbs have multifactorial mechanisms of action, so there can be no resistance. We were just talking about that. And also, in that bigger synergistic picture, there's the concept of immune support rather than direct destruction of microorganisms is a significant mechanism of action for ethnoveterinary remedies. So we all know that, right? The healthier animals get fewer parasites, fewer fleas, fewer ticks. I live on a farm, and knock on wood, my family, my animals, we never get Lyme disease because we live at a higher standard of health, a more holistic lifestyle. So if we can get those animals through just supportive and, again, preventative herbs to that, then this becomes parasites and microbes become a secondary concern even before we use the herbs to prevent them or rid the body of them. Does that make sense to everybody? So I think that's really important. And this is just a slide from the CDC showing some of the parasites and how they go through animals and to people, the whole bigger picture connection. So we have some examples and some things to talk about from different cultures. This one's from central Kenya. The importance of research in Africa. One of you in the audience came up and talked to me. She works with an organization that supports animals in Africa. So I said to her this, and she said this was really relevant. Well, here's a whole slide about that. There are 1.5 million Kenyans living right in central Kenya, which is, I think, about half their population of the whole country. It is rapidly being deforested and medicinal plants are being lost. However, pharmaceuticals are unaffordable and versus most traditional healers. They don't charge for their services at all. They just get paid back in product and supported by the community. Even the community is more holistic and working together, symbiotic. Herbal remedies are, again, broad spectrum and prevent resistance. Ethnoveterinary knowledge is transmitted vertically. Remember, that's from parent to child or via generations, and is being lost to the younger generation as they become more urban. And some of the diseases and parasites they're dealing with, ticks are the main ectoparasite in cattle that the local people control using traditional plant extracts. So again, bigger picture, this isn't just about preventing ticks, which obviously cause blood loss and anemia and lowered production, but also they, like us, are having tick-borne disease issues. So preventing ticks prevents those diseases, and then you don't have to treat those diseases. So it's always just a bigger picture in all of this. Helminths are the major productivity constraint in livestock in the tropics and subtropics, with gastrointestinal helminth parasites causing the most common and economically important diseases of grazing animals. These infections lead to lower outputs of animal products as well as manure and traction, leading to negative impacts on the livelihood of smallholder farms. They have this disease, East Coast fever, and for it they treat by cauterizing the lymph nodes and then applying plant extracts topically as well as giving them orally. And they cauterize the lymph nodes because it is the swollen parotid lymph nodes in front of the shoulder blades that swell up in this disease. And anaplasmosis is the most common disease of cattle managed by traditional herbal means. And then when we're talking about preventative medicine and just nutritional support and boosting the immune system, mineral salt blocks are prohibitively expensive, so cheaper plant products are used to bring in the minerals, local products such as cottonseed, linseed, sunflowers, soya meal, and croton seeds. So again, using local resources to support. In Pakistan, in livestock, ectoparasites are a larger problem than endoparasites. Livestock obtain wounds due to infighting between each other, excessive scratching, often due to the ectoparasites. I'm going to let that go by. That's a very squeaky cart. Okay, and wild carnivore bites. So they get these wounds. Fly insects lay eggs in these open wounds. I think we all know what happens then. Endoparasites are less of a problem because it's so sandy that they don't survive in that sand, and they don't have the same issues as like on dirt and grass that just retains the parasitic eggs, so they don't get to go through their whole life cycle. There were 77 ethno-remedies reported, 61 for ectoparasites and 16 for helminths, so we can see that difference there. 49 were plant-based and the other 28 were dairy-based. So. Remedies were used for all domestic species, and their dosing is very specific. The small animals, the cats and dogs, get half what the large animals, the goats and cows, get. So they have two doses, large animal and small animal, period. Again, we said that they're less specific about how they dose animals than people. Here's a great example of that. So. The dosage, administration, and application were all indication specific. So here they're actually not treating in that holistic way that we look at of the individual. They are treating in the way we learned in vet school of treat the disease. But that kind of makes sense with ticks, and you know, it's all kind of the same, so they have the same underlying issues. So 95% of people were satisfied with their ethnoveterinary remedies. We're never going to see 95% of people satisfied with a pharmaceutical, right? That's a huge, staggering success number. And they transmit the knowledge vertically, horizontally, and obliquely. So, very big part of their culture. Here's South Africa. These are South African cattle. 60% of South Africans consult traditional healers. However, livestock owners generally treat their own animals using medicinal plant knowledge that they themselves possess. 75% of rural livestock owners use plant or plant-based remedies to treat animal ailments. So again, a huge part of their society, but interesting that in human medicine, they go to a healer, but in the veterinary world, they treat their own animals. They are the healer. So, and ethnoveterinary medicine, again, plays a significant role in the management of diseases in a cost-effective and accessible manner. And they treat protozoa, viruses, bacteria, fungi, and helminths. And just as an example of one of the other studies in the Himalayas, the present study has reported the ethnoveterinary medicinal uses of 24 angiosperm plant species. These plant species belong to 23 genera, 15 families. Majority of them are perennial. They use all the plant parts, such as leaves, inflorescences, seeds, rhizomes, and roots. This is when we talked about that biodiverse region and good places to study. There's a huge altitudinal range from 1,500 meters to 3,400 meters. They grow in a diverse habitats such as valley plains, montane forests, subalpine and alpine pastures. And these plant species, through different modes of preparation to form crude drugs, are fed as food supplements to promote faster weight gain. They're used to soothe burns, abrasions, and wounds, used as laxatives, diuretics, antipyretics, and for the treatment of digestive, respiratory, locomotory, and reproductive disorders. A lot of these, if they're not talking about parasites, they're talking about reproduction, because that's another huge, you know, especially if you're selling the animals, reproduction is where it's at. It's where their income is. It's where they need the productivity. So in the Algerian steppe, exploring the relationship with human medicine, traditional veterinary knowledge is still key to keep sheep and goat herders in the Algerian steppe, but a knowledge transmission gap seems to exist between the older and younger generations, and ethnoveterinary practices may disappear in the near future. Treatments for human and animal care overlap to a large extent, and a causal relationship possibly exists for at least some of them. However, overall, a smaller number of remedies are used to treat animals than humans and for less therapeutic applications. Livestock numbers are increasing in the Algerian steppe, and nomadic pastoralism is a primary profession of these communities. So in order to keep these communities, we've got to keep those livestock healthy. The search for grass and water together with ensuring the health and reproduction of the herd constitute the main concerns of the breeder. This quest dictates the nomads' regular and continuous movement through the great steppe regions, and it also results in a profound dependence of these communities on the natural environment of the steppe. These populations often use plants for health care, as herbal remedies are cheap, effective, and easily accessible. Every article says that, right? Like, these are the salient points. The traditional botanical knowledge of nomads is not limited to human medicine, but extends to the treatment of animals. But the number of people who claim not to have knowledge of traditional herbal remedies for human care is about double than that of animal health. Again, they treat their animals, but somebody else treats them. This may indicate that the nomads have more knowledge of treatments for animal health than for human health, as herds are of great economic and cultural importance, or that biomedicine first replaces traditional medicine for human health care. And lastly, mainly aerial plant parts, the above ground parts, are used. If animal self-medication, again, zoopharmacognosy, is one source of ethnoveterinary medicine. The lack of roots could be explained because leaves, stems, and seeds are normal plant parts foraged by domestic animals, while digging up and consuming roots is a much less common behavior. At least for herbivores, they're talking about the livestock. So it would make sense to treat with what the animals treat with. And in Spain, ethnoveterinary medicine is used to treat the digestive system. Plants used to treat digestive disorders such as diarrhea, flatulence, as well as purgatives or for toothache. Catarrh remedies for colds in the respiratory system. Birth and post-birth. There's contraceptive plants, which is also important, and those used as abortifacients or birth coadjuvants to encourage the expulsion of the placenta. For the kidneys, the plants with a diuretic effect, or those used to control the level of uric acid. Again, we have the infectious and parasitic diseases, plants used for vermin parasites to treat infestations of fleas or scabies, infectious diseases such as distemper, and animals used in the ritual prevention of some bacteria infections. Traumatic lesions and poisonings, so wounds, bone fractures, and dislocations. So under metabolic, they have analgesics, depuratives, invigoratives, detoxicants, or whose ashes, sometimes plants are burned and the ashes are fed as a mineral salt supplement for some animals. This group included alopecia and other conditions. And lastly, in the eyes, they treat an ailment known as noob, which is a cloudy eye condition, a type of keratoconjunctivitis characterized by the appearance of a white membrane over the eye that impairs vision. So. And in Cameroon, farmers claimed that 33 out of 55 cattle diseases and ailments, which is 60% prevalent in the northwest province of Cameroon, are treatable or preventable solely by traditional medicine. Some 9% of these diseases can only be treated using orthodox methods, while the remaining 31% are dealt with by the complementary use of ethnoveterinary and orthodox veterinary practices. In the latter case, livestock stress that orthodox practices, that would be pharmaceuticals, should be used only after the traditional ones have failed. They claim that about 91% of their animal health problems can be solved by means of traditional medicines. In some cases, they prefer to use traditional medicines even where orthodox drugs are available. Again, lower cost, efficacy, one treatment for various ailments. Fact that they rely on local knowledge and manpower. Again and again, every article says this. The owners, again, have the good understanding of the plant parts and quantities needed, the methods used in harvesting, processing, storing, preserving, and utilizing medicinal plants to ensure good drug efficacy. And I really think this is important, to enhance the survival of the plant germplasm. They include that in their treatment. You know, like Greg Tilford was talking about, we all have to learn, only take a small percentage, leave the plant to grow. Like, I have to teach that when I teach my big herbal medicine course. I have to teach that. These people inherently know, save the plant, we're going to need it next year. So I think that's a very important. And I told you I'd talk about two different areas treating the same issues in different ways. So they looked at owners of pneumatic cart pulling camels in Pakistan. And they had one group that was urban and one group that was rural with the camels. And there's some differences in how they treated. These indigenous local practices include folk belief, the use of medicinal plants, surgical techniques, and management practices to diagnose, prevent, or treat a wide variety of diseases. So again, ethnoveterinary medicine is bigger than just plants, just ingestible treatments. Study compared urban camel care to desert camel care and found that the ethnoveterinary treatment practices used by the owners of city-dwelling camels appear to be different from those documented for the treatment of diseases of desert-dwelling camels. So even though these animals live close and they're the same animals and kind of the same culture, different regions, you know, even close together, do things very differently. But they did treat the same diseases, sarcoptic mange and trypanosomiasis. They also treated GI disorders, respiratory diseases, skin conditions, prevention of halitosis was a big one they treated. I guess people don't want to ride with camels, they'd have bad breath. Specifically in the city, they had to treat salt deficiency because the camels had a lack of access to forage, so that was a very city-specific disease. And malnutrition, because like so many animals that are used for human transport, there can be a lot of overuse, overwork, and malnutrition. In Tuscany, and these are Tuscan cattle, this was the anti-ethnoveterinary medicine study. It made me a little sad, but it's important to talk about. The majority of people interviewed were farmers living rurally. The majority of the ethnobotanical veterinary practices which were collected have been substituted by current, read pharmaceutical, veterinary treatments. The most prevalent and feared diseases are tuberculosis and listeriosis, both of which are now controlled by prevention practices. And for these diseases, no ethnoveterinarian treatments existed in this region. So they weren't treating it before until we came in with pharmaceutical medicine and, kind of a westernized mode of living and prevention. There was nothing being done about these diseases that were their most prevalent and feared diseases. For other animal diseases, occasionally natural remedies are used, as in the case of the most common forms of salmonellosis, which strike farm poultry, and erysipelas in pigs is also still occasionally treated herbally. But that was about it. So I want to end with, I mentioned to you in the last hour, Cheryl Lons went to Trinidad and Tobago and did her PhD. And she has all these great anecdotes, so I'm going to share some really fun things that she saw there just in her studies. And in Trinidad, they have categories of plants used for hunting success to enhance the hunting dogs. The first is steaming. The plants are used as baths for mental and or physical stimulation. They place plants actually in the dog's nose. The plants are used for nasal and chest decongestion, so the dog will have a better sense of smell. For people who are in this morning, when Greg Tilford was talking about the herb that you can get to cause sneezing and clear all that out, this is the same idea as that. I think it was a fleabane he talked about for that. Sorry. Doctrine of signatures. The plant is, we talked about this in the last hour, thought to have a quality or characteristic that resembles the prey animal or the prey animal's behavior. This quality of the plant is thought to be transferred to the dog, again, in a bath. They're big on their baths. And the last one, this is my favorite, I think it's really fun, is the cross. If the dog is not following the game animal, the dog is faced upstream in a river, then bathed with crushed leaves from 7 plants, and then turned to face downstream. And then presumably it hunts better. So, yeah.
Like bathing the dog in that bath when you're going out hunting, are they also taking response to the energy of the
Or masking the scent of the dogs. Absolutely. I mean, they're not doing this because it doesn't work. It's way too much work. So clearly it works for them, whether that's just the intention makes it work or whether it is something about the bathing in those herbs. Excuse me. Right. There's got to be a reason, absolutely, but I mean, when you read it in this vacuum, it sounds really funny. But yes, they're not doing this to their dogs for no reason, right? So that's a very good point. So I liked this. In a farmer-managed medicinal plant research, this farmer kind of took it upon himself to do very informal research of, he had 10,000 chickens. He's a major poultry producer in Trinidad and Tobago. And he divided his chicks into a control, 2 treatment groups, one with this plant called Wonder of the World and a second with commercial vitamins. The treatment groups, both of them, the chicks fared better than the control, but there was no difference between the commercial vitamins and the Wonder of the World in combating debeaking stress and vaccination stress. The absence of stress was described as brighter chicks with increased feed intake and claimed to have 4 years of success with this plant. But again, even though they worked equally, it was much cheaper to use this local indigenous plant than import commercial vitamins. So again, part of the value of ethnoveterinary research. It doesn't always have to be better than a pharmaceutical. Being just as good is useful when it's got all these other advantages. That's why the advantages don't just include being more efficacious, although in the case of bacterium parasites, that is a huge one. So they had 2 more experiments in this article, both with good results. My question is always, would he have told her about his failures? Like, clearly he does a lot of experiments with plants on his farm, which is fabulous, right? But would he really have told this researcher about the ones that didn't work? So he had a lot of stories about success. And I'm going to leave you with this last one. Another farmer in Trinidad and Tobago, a doe had produced kids with front limb deformities 2 years in a row from different sires. The owner speculated that the doe had been eating moldy bits of hay that the other goats refused to eat while she was pregnant. Therefore, during the subsequent pregnancy, the owner regularly fed the doe turmeric, with the result that the doe gave birth to completely normal triplets. The dose was a half tablespoon of turmeric added daily to the feed 3 weeks prior to breeding and for at least a full month after breeding to, quote, detoxify the system of the doe. The owner repeated the treatment the following year during pregnancy with the same result, normal triplets. So, again, it detoxifies the liver. So it detoxified the moldy bits. You know, rather than actually feed the goat something healthy, he just used an herb to prevent the problems. So that's it on ethnoveterinary. Thank you all.
Finding your visibility in today's climate with website creation, hosting, SEO and social media management, telephone greetings and VoIP services, and online video production.